Right, and why are you marching today?
The equality is very important, and as I get older, it's more and more important. I grew up in the 60s and early 70s when a lot of this was going on, and was more disconnected from it. But age makes a huge difference in realizing what the importance of equality is.
So you think you're more connected now to everything than you were back when you were, say, a teenager?
I am. Oh, definitely. Yeah, more of a worldview, more involved with the issues, more experience. Makes a huge difference.
So, did you get yourself involved in any of the marches back in the 60s and early 70s, or were you kind of just a bystander and watching it on TV when it happened?
During the 60s, I was watching it on TV. In the 70s, when I was in college, I was involved in a lot of the marches and anti-war programs.
So, what do you think of the Black Lives Matter movement as a whole? Do you think it's trying to help race relations, or do you think there's a little bit trying to separate the country?
I don't think they're trying to separate the country. I think just as with the civil rights marches, it was acknowledgement, informational. Certainly there are elements that are, just as with the civil rights movement, that were more militant, I guess I'd say. But I think the whole Black Lives Matter movement is toward information and realization of just what the situations are.
So what do you think of those that do try and take advantage of a march gone wrong, that kind of use it to defame a movement or to kind of have their own personal gain?
I think they're outliers for the most part. They have their own agendas, which I don't know necessarily what they are, but there is still a lot of bigotry, and I think a certain amount of that has to do with the ingrained bigotry that they have.
So you kind of think that there is systematic racial tensions more than just like the individual or certain area basis?
By systematic, where do you want to go with that?
Like within the system, like disproportionate, statistically speaking, more like African Americans, more Hispanics tend to get arrested or get charged with heavy crime than your Caucasian, despite the fact that being Caucasian is the majority of the population.
Mm-hmm. I don't know as it's racism or prejudice of probably simple prejudice that we have toward socioeconomic standing. Certainly part of it would be racial. I think there is a systematic bias there. Not that it's not necessarily unrealistic in certain instances, but I think it's wrong. Everybody should be judged on their own merits, and as a group, certainly there is a disproportionate amount of Hispanic and Black populations that are involved with the justice system, and I don't know what the answer to that is.
Like a lot of people say that it's kind of like where the communities are because of how they were in the 60s and when they started when more rights were getting gained, that they didn't really move away from communities, so policing is heavily enforced in those communities, whereas in like a predominantly white neighborhood there's not as much policing. Do you think that is reasonable, or do you think that there's something that is a valid reason as to why there's more policing in those communities?
I think the policing in the communities increased policing in the communities has to do with going where the trouble is. If there is a need for it, that's where law enforcement is going to go, for whatever reason. If it were to start happening in the richer parts of town, the policing would certainly increase over there.
So, policing is just, in general, just how it should be, and how a lot of people, including myself, see it, is where it's wherever the crime is, and sadly that is predominantly in your minority communities. Do you have an idea on why that might be?
I'm not absolutely certain, of course, of why it's in those communities, but I think it has to do with probably the income levels. There's going to be more crime when you're forced to steal something to just make it from day to day. Our social system isn't set up to where it's easy to live when you're in an urban environment with high prices. You can't get out of it. You have to pay those prices. You have to live in that area. And I think we're kind of stuck at that point. And that being the case, I think crime is going to go up. I was in Chicago in the 70s when they had after some of the riots in South Chicago, and the people had no place else to go. The residents had no place else to go. They had to live in that area because they couldn't afford to be anywhere else.
And what do you think we can do to change that, to where people who are in bad areas, who can't afford to leave those areas, what do you think needs to change to improve upon that?
There are a number of things that I think that need to change. One of which is our social outlook about caring for our brothers and sisters. Another thing is possibly rent controls, but there are so many politically motivated issues that go with so many of those things that, frankly, I don't know what the answer is. I wish I did. If I did, I'm certain I'd be rich.
I think we all think that. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
You bet. And you